Hi everyone, this is Cynthia. Let's talk books. And because it is the end of December, but I'm not quite ready to do a full wrap up of the month or to start talking about my reading goals for 2021. I haven't like finalized those. I thought I would instead share my worst books of 2020. I'm also starting with this video because I'm thinking of getting it out of the way. I primarily read really good books and excellent books this year. But of course, every year there are a few books that just don't quite make the cut. And these are not horrible books by any means. In fact, most of the books on this list got 3 stars from me on Goodreads. But for some reason or another, they just were not books for me. I just didn't like them. And I will tell you a little bit about why. These are also in no particular order, although except for the last two. The last two I will talk about were my 2 least favorite books. So some of these are objectively not bad books. They maybe just disappointed me in some way or another. That's what happened with this first one, Shadow of Night by Deborah Harkness. This is book number 2 in the All Souls trilogy. And I really loved parts of that first book, A Discovery of Witches, but the end of that book, or about 2/3, the 2 last thirds of the book just were going in. It got really tropey, really predictable, and so I hadn't picked up the second book in a long time, but I decided to give it a shot, and there were things I liked. Okay, there were things I liked about this book. Harkness is a historian, and so the way she talks about her character, who is also a historian, traveling in time to the time period she studies, I totally identified with all of that. And actually, Elizabethan England is Harkness's time period, so you could tell that she was having a lot of fun having her characters interact with historical figures that she knows and studies. But I was not there with her, and there were large chunks of the book that were boring, and that's kind of the kiss of death and these kinds of like fantasy romance stories. So it was just disappointing. Again, not the worst book in the world. I can see why people love it, but it was just disappointing to me given how much I had loved that first third of A Discovery of Witches. The next book is another one that, again, not the worst book in the world by any means. In fact, there were elements of it that I really liked, but overall it just disappointed me, and it is The Midnight Library by Haig. I had really enjoyed The Humans by this author, and so I guess I had too high of expectations. The Midnight Library is about, we start off with somebody whose life seems to be going really wrong. Like all these bad things are happening to the beginning, and she is kind of moving towards committing suicide. And she ends up in this library, in this kind of different dimension between life and death, in which she gets to explore other dimensions of her life. You know, like what would have happened if I'd made a different choice at this point and at that point. And she gets to live those lives for some period of time. So the concept was really interesting for me. But overall, it was also one of those things where there were just too many parts of this that were boring. And for a book about alternate dimensions, like, you've got to give us something. Some of the lives were really interesting, and that's why I still ended up overall kind of liking the book, but very disappointing in that the premise just had so much promise, and it ended up not delivering for me, at least personally. The next book is This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal, El-Mohtar, and Max Gladstone. This is a short novella type. Again, the premise of the story is fantastic. This is about 2 female agents engaged in this time war, and they're jumping from different time periods trying to set the stage for their side winning, and they end up leaving each other little Easter eggs and notes and communicating through time and space and falling in love. Great premise, but there's not a lot of ground setting at the beginning, and so I felt really lost in the beginning, not knowing what time period we were in. And like some time periods in the story were clearly meant to be futuristic and for us to not understand, but others were not. And like the letters themselves, loved them. But then everything else just didn't work for me. It just didn't work for me. And I know a lot of people really love this. I think I can see why. I mean, the writing was really great, but it was just not for me. I guess that's gonna be the repetitive theme in this video. The next book is Magpie Murders by Anthony Horowitz. This is my first Horowitz book, and this is one of those like a story within a story books. So you start off with this editor getting, you know, the book from the author who writes murders, and she begins reading it, and then for a large chunk of the story, we're in the story that has been written. It's a murder mystery, whodunit, playing homage to Agatha Christie. So if you're like a Christie fan, I think that aspect of it is just going to be really fun. And then at the end, we come back to the editor and a real life murder that has taken place. And so the story within the story was great, totally worked for me. The scaffolded story, though, no. It's not like you're like, wait, why am I supposed to care about these characters? In the end, like, I finished the book, so I suppose there's enough in there that I kept reading because I wanted to know what happened. So that in itself is a victory for the author and for me, but it was just so disappointing. I really wanted more out of it, and I hope that Horowitz has other books that would work better for me, because this one just did not. All right, and we finally get to the last two books in my worst books of 2020. And these are books that I think are more, I just disliked. So there's less of this just didn't work for me, and more of this is just not great. And the first, and what I think is probably more objectively bad book is Unpregnant by Jenni Hendrix. Unpregnant is a book about a teenager who finds herself pregnant and is trying to get an abortion, and she can't, and she goes on this road trip to try to get to end the pregnancy. And it was so like heavily written, and like as someone who is pro-choice, I found myself like really annoyed with how heavy-handed the author was with the messaging. And also because I've been reading other books that deal with the very same theme and in fact have the same premise, and were just done so much better. In fact, I don't remember the name and the author of the other book, but I'll put it up here somewhere. This is so much better. If you were thinking about picking up Unpregnant, just forget about that one and pick up this one instead. It has been made into a is it a TV movie or series? I'm gonna watch it. I got HBO Max so I could watch Wonder Woman, and I saw that it was available on the app. So I'm gonna watch the show, hoping that the show is so much better than the actual book. But yeah, just Unpregnant just to me like, just not good. Don't pick it up. Save yourself a lot of time and headaches. Like, it doesn't even matter if you agree with the politics of the book. The book is not good. And then finally, I left the most controversial to the end. The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. This is a book that I am sure will be in a lot of best of 2020 lists. And it just did not work for me. Again, I don't think it's the worst book in the world. But, so the premise, this is a horror book, right? The premise is that there's a vampire that comes to this neighborhood, and this suburban neighborhood, and children start disappearing. And this happened before, decades ago. Now, in the present, it's happening again, and this group of moms that have formed a book club kind of come together, and one of them just connects the dots that what's happening is that this newcomer is a vampire. The premise I really like. I get that it's supposed to be a kind of allegory and critique of white suburban like communities, but in the end it ended up being really weird. Like as I was reading it, I was like, okay, the only black characters that show up in the story are like maids, like in service to the white middle class, upper middle class families. And the author talks about how, you know, he was thinking about his upbringing in America in the, what, it was like 70s and 80s or something, and about, you know, how strong suburban mothers can be. And I felt like he unintentionally really criticized suburban motherhoods. They don't come off as like strong characters necessarily. They come off as racist, self-involved, as basically all the stereotypes that I think he was trying to criticize. And so the allegory or the critique of that culture just did not work for me in that way, because I thought he, like, the whole point was supposed to be that suburban mothers can, you know, go up toe to toe with a vampire, and instead you see them behaving in really atrocious ways, saying highly racist, sexist stuff. One of the sons is Hendrix writes him as being obsessed with Nazis, and like I also get how that could work as like allegorical commentary, and but it did not work for me. I know I'm not the only one. I will post a couple of black reviewers in the reviews of this book down below, so you can go take a look, because at first as I was reading it, I thought like maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's all just in my head, and then when I started seeing other reviews of the book, I was like, okay, it was not just me. There was just something off with that book, and you know, parts of it did work for me. There were really interesting scenes about like the sacrifices that mothers have to make for their children and for security, that were interesting to me. But overall the book was just disappointing, because it has a really kind of fantastic, really great premise that ultimately did not work for me. So those were my most disappointing, and overall, you know, it's not terrible. I only had 6 books in this list, so it means that the vast majority of books that I read in 2020 actually worked for me in some way or another. These were just the ones that stood out to me, so I was going through the list. I was like, yeah, these didn't work. These were disappointing. So I am so sorry if this is any of the books on this list are your favorite books. I don't mean anything against anyone personally, and feel free to disagree with me. Let's talk about it down below. If any of these lists like worked for you, tell me why down below. You know, sometimes it really is just about the mood we're in when we read some of these books, and that's the reason why some of them don't work for us. And that's totally fine. We're allowed to disagree with one another. So let's chat about it down in the comments. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.